Hey guys, it's Mr. Mini Painter, and today I'm painting Beechbone the Ent, the new addition to the Lord of the Rings range by Games Workshop. Now before I continue with this video, I'd love it if you leave a comment below or subscribe to the channel. This is basically what keeps me going, and I thank you so much in advance. Now to start off with, I primed this model with red bone. You can use a light gray if you want, and the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to be using contrast paints. I chose Wraithbone basically because I have this lying around, but any bright color will do. There are lovely details on this model, such as the tiny birds on his head, the Uruk shield and sword. His face is amazing, and he's one of the biggest Ents in the Fangorn forest. So what's not to like? So I start with a skeleton horde contrast paint for the entire model. Where possible, I try to leave the leaves. I leave the leaves as white as possible. Otherwise, we can touch them up later on. So don't be too careful, please, because it's large areas we're painting here. So the benefit of contrast paint is speed, right? Speed in multiple toned colors. But mainly quick coverage. Basically, that's the biggest win. So I'm covering the entire model with the skeleton horde, and make sure to touch every nook and cranny you can find. At this point, it's really not that big of a deal if you touch other parts of the model, for example, the rock or the leaves. As I said, you can just easily go over with the base color, your primer color, and fix that. So in the end, you should have something like this, and at this point I thought it was a bit too dark for Beechbone because, well, let's face it, he's a beech, so he has to be a bit more brighter. But as a base tone, this is beautiful. You can see that I left most of the leaves untouched, and the rocks, of course. And I wanted to add a little bit of extra different colors, so I dry brushed some Gorthor brown onto it. It's a bit unorthodox probably, but I wanted to have some different kinds of brown in here because a tree is never a single color of brown, or any color for that matter. So I just touched that here and there. I'm mainly focused on the lower parts as to create a shaded area maybe. I then brightened it up a little bit with some rock art flesh. And we're getting some of those beech tree tones already. We're going to take it a little bit further even by using some palette witch flesh. Really wipe that dry brush dry before using it, because you do not want to be painting it white, you want some white tones on it. Next, all the stone parts I painted with Black Templar. Why Black Templar? Black Templar is basically a contrast paint in a really dark gray tone, and when applied lightly like this, you get some instant shading here and there, and it is a beautiful base color for any kind of rock. The top part I touched a little more lightly than the bottom part. The bottom part can be darker, of course, because it's shaded, but we're going to brighten it up afterwards anyway, so it doesn't really matter. It's a great dark color for these kind of rocks. Now to continue with some base colors, the base itself I painted with Garagax Sewer. I love this color for a base of any kind of model because it's a genuine sand look, like dark sand. And this is a forest area, so there's a lot of dark sand there. Now we're going to continue with the rocks, and I'm highlighting it with some Administratum Gray. I used a dry brush to do so. Use a kind of stipple effect, if you know what I mean. Just to dab your brush when wiped off, to be clear, onto the rocky parts, so you get some specks of brighter gray, because a rock is never a single tone, just as a tree is never a single tone of brown. So just speck it on here and there and do some edge highlighting. And we're going to take it a little bit further with gray sear. I focused on the corners and the very sharp edges of the stone, and also touched that with a dry brush. You can also do that with a fine-tipped brush, whatever you prefer, but for me this worked perfectly. Then I'm going to start on the leaves, and for that I'm using Creed Camo, again a contrast paint. And the fun part of these contrast paints is that you instantly create darker and brighter areas. And for the leaves, which have a lot of detail on this model, that's a perfect way to create a base color, because you have some instant shading in there as well. Now, remember that I painted the tree in one big swipe of contrast paint, so I also touched some of the leaves on his chest, which I'm retouching with some gray sear, or you can use the same base color if you want. Now make sure to let that dry before continuing, because you do not want your paints to mix. Then I'm also applying the same Creed Camo on the repainted leaves. There was some here and on his knee that I had to redo. And that's it for the base colors. Next we're going to be highlighting the leaves with some Elysian green. I'm also using a dry brush to do so, because there are such tiny details on the leaves. It would take ages to do it by brush, and this gives a beautiful result. Gently touch it, don't use too much paint, wipe off most of your paint. The biggest mistake I ever made, and I'm making it even now, is using too much paint on a dry brush. I always think there should be at least a tiny amount of paint, but there is, trust me, there is. So wipe off all of it. It's better to do it twice or 3 or 4 times than to do one layer of paint too much on this, because you're destroying your base colors. Now we're going to take it a tiny step further, and for that I'm using All Green Camo. It's a little bit more yellowy, and in the end I decided to use even more yellow than this. So you could maybe skip this step if you want, but I'm building it up gradually, and I wanted to have some different leaves on there, not all of them the exact same color, but more or less. So I'm mixing the All Green Camo with some Zamazi Desert, which is a quite heavy yellow color, so don't overdo it, but I wanted to have some yellow tones on the edges of the leaves, and again use a dry brush and go over it very gently. I then wanted to emphasize some details on the face by using Zamazi Desert, and he has these large eyebrows, a big mustache, and kind of a beard, which I touched, so it stood out a little bit from the original colors of the bark, and it's just a tiny detail, but it's enough to make the face speak a little bit more. It's a little bit more visible, more prominent, because the face is as beautiful as it is a little bit hidden in the entirety of the model. The eyes I painted with palette witch flesh, like I would do normal eyes, and these are quite large models, so it's not really that difficult. Try and leave a tiny edge of darkness around the white within the eye. That gives it a beautiful standalone look, like kind of an eyelid detail. Next, I painted in the eyes with Mournfang brown. I thought this is an Ent, so you would probably have brown eyes. And of course a tiny pupil of Abaddon black. On the regular models it's almost impossible to do 3 colors, the whites, a color and a black. So for this, try and give it your best. Then there are 2 tiny birds on the branches on his heads, and I repainted them with gray cere to have them kind of a base color. And I wanted some part of the birds to be gray. Because there are such tiny details on a very large monotone model, I wanted them to stand out with some colors. So I used Storm Fiend as a contrast paint on his wings, on their wings. I'm not really into birds, so I don't know how they are called, but I'm pretty sure that there are grey birds with blue wings. At least in The Lord of the Rings there are, so I have decided. The head I painted with Gryph-hound orange. I kind of blended it into the grey, so I decided to give it a solid color on the top of his head and kind of blend the color by watering it down and mixing it to the grey part. Now final details, lead belcher on the sword and the shield. The Uruk remains on this model as a base color. There we have it. It's a fun detail. They've probably trampled on some poor Uruk. I toned it down with some Nuln Oil, and I went quite heavy on it. It's okay if it's worn down, beaten, blotchy, or whatever. Because it's destroyed, right? The Uruk won't really mind how it looks, so I chose to do a destroyed look. I also touched it with some Agrax Earthshade, and I kind of mixed those 2 shades together to create a dirty look. Finally, some Corvus black on the handle, and I applied some Nuln Oil over it to get some shades. And that's it. We have finished our Beechbone. Beechbone the Ent, the biggest of all Ents, and look at him, he looks amazing, fearsome, and quite easily done with a lot of contrast paints. So I'm curious what you think of this tutorial, how you fared on your model, and please leave a comment below to tell me about it or ask any questions you want, because I'm happy to answer it and I'll always react to your response. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I hope it was of any help to you guys, and I love to see you in one of my next videos. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one. Bye bye!